Cold open shock hook inside a glossy downtown restaurant. Owner Marcus Doyle humiliates a tired-looking black woman named Loretta Sims, accusing her of begging for a table and ordering staff to remove her in front of a packed lunch crowd. Rewind plus emotional backstory. We go back 6 hours to Loretta's cramped apartment, revealing she raised her son Elias alone after his father died, working 2 jobs to put him through school and carrying his late father's old watch as her only reminder of better days. Rich/public setting build. The restaurant, Doyle's Chop House, is introduced in full. Marble floors, a wall of wine, a lunch crowd of investors and city officials, and a nervous staff who all fear Marcus. First humiliation layer. Loretta is seated near the kitchen, then accused of not being able to pay, then asked to leave when she simply asked for water while waiting for someone. Repeated injustice/system pattern. Flashback-style beats reveal Marcus has done this before. An elderly veteran turned away, a black delivery driver denied a bathroom, a hostess fired for defending a guest. Second good character/silent witness. A young waiter, Danny, quietly tries to help Loretta and hints that Marcus has a pattern that corporate has ignored for years. Villain crosses the line. Marcus calls security, has Loretta physically walked out onto the sidewalk in front of the whole restaurant, humiliating her completely. Hidden proof/evidence stacking. We learn Loretta's son Elias is not a struggling student, but a real estate attorney representing the group that just bought the building. And he's been quietly documenting Marcus's behavior for months through a whistleblowing hostess. Authority entry/power walk. Elias arrives at the restaurant in a suit, flanked by the new building's ownership representatives, and the room goes still as staff recognize him. Big reveal plus proof scene. Elias reveals he is not visiting his mother by chance. He is there to sign the $2 million lease renewal for the space, and his mother is the reason he became a lawyer. Proof includes the lease documents, video from Danny's phone, and corporate complaint records. Villain collapse plus justice. Marcus's excuses collapse under the weight of the evidence. The ownership group terminates the lease negotiation, and Marcus loses the restaurant and his reputation publicly. Aftermath plus emotional ending plus CTA. Months later, Loretta is honored at the reopening of the space under new ownership. Danny is promoted to manager, and the story closes with a message about dignity and a call to action for viewers. Ma'am, this is a restaurant, not a shelter. If you're here to beg, the door is right behind you. The words cut through the clatter of silverware like a blade. Every head at the lunch counter turned. A waiter froze mid-step, a tray of wine glasses trembling in his hands. And in the middle of the marble-floored dining room of Doyle's Chop House, a 54-year-old woman named Loretta Sims sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, her old brown coat buttoned to her chin. She said nothing at first. She simply looked up at the man standing over her, tall, tanned, wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent, and let the silence answer for her. "I'm waiting for someone," she finally said, her voice calm, almost gentle. "I ordered a water. That's all." Marcus Doyle laughed. Not a real laugh, the kind rich men used to make a room agree with them. A few of the businessmen at the bar chuckled along, not because it was funny, but because it was easier than staying quiet. "A water," Marcus repeated, shaking his head. "You know what a table here costs per hour in foot traffic? You're sitting in prime real estate, ma'am, taking up a 4-top, and you haven't ordered a single thing off the menu." "I told the host I was waiting for my son," Loretta said. "He should be here soon." "Sure he is." Marcus snapped his fingers toward the front of house. "Get security. Let's help this woman find the door." A hostess near the podium flinched. A young waiter, a thin kid named Danny, maybe 22, took half a step forward like he wanted to say something, then stopped himself, glancing nervously at his manager. Loretta didn't move. She didn't argue. She simply reached in her coat pocket and closed her fingers around something small and worn. An old wristwatch, its leather band cracked with age. She held it the way people hold things when the world gets loud and they need something quiet to hang on to. The other diners went back to their meals, uncomfortable, unwilling to get involved. Nobody in that restaurant that afternoon had any idea who this quiet woman was, or who was about to walk through that door looking for her. They had no idea who they had just humiliated. 6 hours earlier, in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the east side of the city, Loretta Sims had been awake since 4:40 in the morning. She always woke before her alarm. 22 years of hospital shifts had trained her body that way. Up before the sun, dressed before the coffee finished brewing, out the door before the buses got crowded. She used to work nights as a home health aide, caring for elderly patients whose own families rarely visited. Now at 54, her knees ached more than they used to, but she still worked 2 jobs because that was what it took. On her nightstand sat a photograph in a cheap plastic frame. Her and a man named Curtis, young and laughing on a boardwalk somewhere, decades ago. Curtis had died when their son Elias was 11. A construction accident. No insurance payout worth mentioning. Just a folded flag from his years in the reserve, a wristwatch he never got to pass down himself, and a woman left to raise a boy alone on a caretaker's wage. She raised that boy anyway. She worked doubles so he could stay in the honors program. She sold her car so he could take the LSAT prep course he needed. She sat in the back of a university auditorium in a dress she'd bought secondhand and cried when they called his name, Elias Curtis Sims, Juris Doctor, cum laude. That morning, before the sun came up, Elias had called her. "Mama, I need you to meet me for lunch today. Somewhere downtown. It's important." "Important how?" she'd asked, already smiling, because his voice had that excited edge it got when he was about to surprise her. "You'll see. Just trust me. We're something nice. I'll meet you there at 1. She'd laughed and told him she didn't own anything nice that wasn't from a decade ago, and he told her that didn't matter, that she'd always looked like she belonged wherever she stood. She hung up the phone, sat on the edge of her bed, and held Curtis's old watch in her palm for a long moment before slipping her coat on. She had no idea, riding the bus downtown that morning, that in a few hours she would be sitting alone in a restaurant, accused of not belonging there at all. But that small detail, a bus fare paid in exact change, a coat 2 sizes too big, a woman who looked tired instead of wealthy, would become the first crack in a story that was about to fall apart in front of an entire room. Doyle's Chop House sat on the ground floor of a gleaming glass tower in the city's financial district, the kind of restaurant that existed less for food and more for status. Marble floors stretched from the entrance to the open kitchen, polished so bright they reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead. An entire wall was devoted to wine, bottles lit from beneath like museum pieces. Waiters wore black aprons ironed to a crease. The tablecloths were pressed white linen, changed after every seating. At lunchtime, the restaurant filled with the city's most self-important people. Investment bankers closing deals over steak, city council aides trading gossip, a table of watch salesmen showing off pieces that cost more than a used car. It was the kind of place where reservations were currency and being seen mattered more than the food. Marcus Doyle had built this restaurant from nothing 7 years earlier, or that was the story he told. In truth, his father had lent him the initial capital, and the building itself belonged to a holding company that leased the space to him under a contract that came up for renewal every 5 years. Marcus liked to forget that part. In his mind, he owned this room, and everyone in it answered to him. He walked the floor like a king walks a courtyard, shaking hands, refilling wine glasses himself for VIPs, laughing loudly enough that everyone could hear how important his friends were. His staff moved around him carefully, the way people move around something that might snap. It was into this room, at noon, that Loretta Sims had walked, wearing her best coat, clutching a folded piece of paper with an address on it, looking for a table where she could wait for her son. The hostess, a young woman named Priya, had seated her without hesitation, a foretop near the window, because Loretta had mentioned she was expecting one more. It was Marcus who noticed her first. Marcus who saw the coat, the worn shoes, the careful way she counted her tip jar change before ordering only a water, and decided, without a single word from her, exactly what kind of person she must be. He was about to be very wrong. In this room, with its marble floors and pressed linen and self-important lunch crowd, was about to feel that mistake in full public view. "Everything all right over here?" Marcus had asked the first time, 20 minutes before the real scene began, his voice syrupy with false warmth as he approached Loretta's table. "Just waiting on my son," she'd said, smiling politely. "I ordered a water while I wait, if that's all right." Of course, of course. He'd walked away that time, but he'd stopped at the host stand and murmured something to Priya, low enough that Loretta couldn't hear, but sharp enough that Priya's shoulders had tensed. "Keep an eye on the woman at 12, he'd said. "We don't do charity seating during the lunch rush." Priya hadn't understood at first. She said she's meeting someone, Marcus. "Sure she is." He'd smiled the smile he used for staff he was about to overrule. "Just watch her." 15 minutes passed. Loretta sat quietly, watching the door, checking the small silver watch she kept in her coat pocket rather than wearing. Curtis's watch, the hands slightly slow, the way it had always run. She didn't touch her water glass more than a few sips. She didn't ask for bread. She simply waited, the way she had waited her whole life for good things to arrive. That was when Marcus returned, this time with an edge in his voice that made two nearby tables look up. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something directly," he said, loud enough to carry. "Do you have a reservation? Do you have a method of payment on file? Because I've got a line of paying guests outside, and I can't have someone taking up a table just to sit." "I told you. I'm waiting for my son," Loretta repeated, her voice steady but quieter now, aware of the eyes on her. "He'll be here any minute." "Right." Marcus glanced at Priya, then back at Loretta, and something in his face hardened into performance. A show for the room, a demonstration of who was in charge. "Ma'am, this is a restaurant, not a shelter. If you're here to beg, the door is right behind you." That was the line that stopped the whole room. And what almost no one noticed, except a thin young waiter named Danny, standing near the kitchen pass with a tray of wine glasses, was that a woman 2 tables away had quietly lifted her phone and started recording. She had no idea the file was already on its way to becoming something much bigger than one bad afternoon. This was not the first time Marcus Doyle had done something like this. It was simply the first time anyone with the power to stop him happened to be watching. 3 months earlier, an elderly man in a faded Army veteran's cap had come in during a slow Tuesday evening, hoping to celebrate a small pension check with a proper meal. Marcus had taken one look at his frayed jacket and told the hostess to seat him somewhere out of view of the windows, then had a waiter rush his order so the table could turn over faster. The old man left without dessert, apologizing for taking up space, though he'd paid in full. 6 weeks before that, a delivery driver, a young black man named Tobias, dropping off a catering order for a private event upstairs, had asked to use the restroom while he waited for a signature. Marcus told him the restrooms were for guests only and pointed him toward a gas station 2 blocks away. Tobias never came back to make another delivery to that address, and the catering company quietly stopped taking Doyle's Chop House's business, though no one ever asked why. And 8 months earlier, a hostess named Carla had gently pushed back when Marcus told her to move a Muslim family wearing hijabs to a table away from the window for the vibe. Carla had said, simply, "That's not okay, Marcus." She was let go 2 weeks later for what the paperwork called repeated tardiness. Carla had never been late a single day in 14 months of employment. None of these stories had ever reached corporate. Doyle's Chop House was technically part of a small restaurant group, backed by investors who checked profit margins far more closely than employee complaints. 2 formal write-ups against Marcus sat in a file cabinet in a regional office, unread, gathering dust behind more urgent paperwork. A pattern doesn't announce itself. It simply repeats quietly until someone finally has the power and the reason to look. Loretta Sims, sitting calmly at a foretop with a water glass and a folded piece of paper in her coat pocket, was about to become the reason. Danny had worked at Doyle's Chop House for 11 months. Ever since dropping out of a hospitality program, he couldn't afford to finish. He needed the job. He needed the tips. And he had learned, the hard way, that disagreeing with Marcus in front of customers meant a scheduling mistake that left you without shifts for 2 weeks. But something about the woman at table 12 made his stomach twist. He waited until Marcus stepped away to intimidate a different table, then crossed the floor and crouched slightly beside Loretta's chair, keeping his voice low. "Ma'am, "I'm real sorry about this," he said. "Can I get you anything?" "On the house. Please don't leave yet." Loretta looked at him, surprised by the kindness, and something in her shoulders relaxed just slightly. "That's very sweet of you, honey. I'm all right. My son should be here any minute." Danny hesitated, glancing over his shoulder to make sure Marcus wasn't watching. "This isn't the first time he's done this," he said quietly. "There was an old veteran a few months back, a delivery driver. A hostess who tried to say something got fired for it. I've tried telling the regional office. Nobody calls back." Loretta's eyes softened, not with pity for herself, but with something closer to recognition. The tired understanding of a woman who had spent her whole life watching this exact pattern play out in different rooms, different decades, same quiet cruelty. "You need to see what he does when nobody important is watching," Danny added, almost to himself. He didn't know it yet, but in less than an hour, someone very important indeed was about to walk through that door, and he was about to find out exactly how much it would matter that Danny had chosen, in this one small moment, to be kind. Marcus's patience, what little he'd been performing, ran out 4 minutes later. "All right, that's enough," he said, striding back to the table, snapping his fingers toward the front entrance where two large men in black polos stood near the coat check, technically employed as event security for private parties upstairs. "Gentlemen, can you help this woman find her way out?" The restaurant went utterly silent. Forks stopped midair. A businessman near the bar actually turned his chair around to watch. "Sir, please," Priya said quietly from the host stand, her voice tight with the kind of fear that comes from watching something you know is wrong and being powerless to stop it. "She said her son is coming." "I don't care whose son is coming," Marcus snapped, loud enough now that his voice bounced off the marble. "I run a business, not a waiting room for people who can't afford to be here." Loretta rose slowly from her chair, her chin lifted, her coat still buttoned to her collar. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply gathered her purse, tucked Curtis's watch deeper into her pocket, and let the two security men flank her, not touching her, but close enough that everyone in the restaurant understood exactly what was happening. She was walked, in full view of 40 lunch guests, past the wine wall, past the open kitchen, past the hostess stand where Priya wouldn't meet her eyes, and out through the glass front doors onto the sidewalk, where the midday sun hit her face and the door swung shut behind her with a soft final click. Marcus straightened his jacket, smiled at the room as if nothing had happened, and clapped his hands once. "All right, folks, sorry for the interruption. Can I get everyone a round of champagne on the house?" A few people clapped. Most just looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to be the one who said something. But he had no idea the call had already been made, because standing near table 12, a woman with her phone still recording quietly slipped it in her purse, opened her messaging app, and sent a video, 11 seconds long, to a number saved simply as Danny, waiter, table 12. Danny had asked her to record at the moment Marcus raised his voice. He didn't know exactly why. He just knew, somehow, that it mattered. What almost no one in that restaurant knew, what Marcus Doyle certainly did not know, was that the woman he had just thrown onto the sidewalk was the mother of the man who was at that very moment 3 blocks away, reviewing the final signature page of a $2 million commercial lease. Elias Sims was 31 years old. He had graduated top of his class in real estate and commercial law, spent 4 years grinding through a mid-sized firm, and had just been brought on as lead counsel for a private investment group that had spent the last 8 months quietly acquiring the glass tower that housed Doyle's Chop House. The lease renewal on the ground floor restaurant space was the final piece of the acquisition, a $2 million, 10-year commercial agreement that would determine whether Doyle's Chop House continued to exist at all, or whether the space would be leased to someone else entirely. Elias had personally reviewed Marcus Doyle's 5-year operating history as part of due diligence. It was, on paper, a strong lease candidate. Profitable, popular, well-located. What the paperwork didn't show, until 3 weeks ago, was a pattern buried in exit interviews, a termination file for a hostess named Carla, with a wrongful dismissal complaint quietly filed and quietly ignored, and a handful of one-star reviews mentioning treatment of guests who didn't look like they belonged, each one deleted from the platform within days of posting. It was Carla, the fired hostess, who had reached out to Elias's firm during the acquisition's public comment period, hoping anyone, would finally listen. Elias had read her complaint twice. Then he'd quietly asked Danny, a waiter he'd exchanged 2 brief messages with after finding his contact through Carla, to let him know if anything happened that confirmed the pattern. He had not expected the confirmation to arrive while his own mother was in the building. His phone buzzed as he stood in the elevator lobby of the tower. 11 seconds of video loading on the screen. His mother, standing calmly at a table. A man in an expensive suit looming over her, the words playing clearly through his earbuds. This is a restaurant, not a shelter. If you're here to beg, the door is right behind you. Elias did not raise his voice. He did not run. He simply closed the video, straightened his tie, tucked the signed lease documents under his arm, and walked toward the glass doors of Doyle's Chop House with the calm, terrible focus of a man who finally had everything he needed. He thought the room belonged to him. In 10 minutes, Marcus Doyle would learn otherwise. The doors of Doyle's Chop House opened with a soft chime that, on any other day, no one would have noticed. This time, 3 people walked in together. A young black man in a charcoal suit, a leather portfolio under one arm. Beside him, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and a sharp blazer. Renata Cole, managing partner of the investment group acquiring the building. And behind them, a building security director carrying a tablet. Priya looked up first, and her breath caught. She recognized Elias immediately. Not from the restaurant, but from the acquisition briefing 2 weeks earlier, where building management had introduced him as lead counsel for the new ownership group. Marcus, still holding court near the bar with a glass of champagne in hand, turned to see who had entered and froze mid-sentence. He knew Elias's face, too. He'd shaken this man's hand at a lease review meeting 8 days ago, called him counselor, made a joke about lawyers that Elias hadn't laughed at. "Mr. Sims," Marcus said, forcing a smile, setting his glass down. "This is a surprise. We weren't expecting." "I know," Elias said quietly. "I wasn't planning to come by until this afternoon either." The restaurant had gone very still. Forks paused again. The businessman at the bar who'd laughed 20 minutes earlier now watched with a different kind of attention. "Is everything all right?" Marcus asked, and for the first time, something in his confident voice cracked, just slightly at the edges. Elias didn't answer right away. He walked slowly toward the foretop near the window, table 12, where a water glass sat half full, condensation running down its side, a chair pushed back exactly the way it had been left when his mother was walked out the door. He looked at the empty chair for a long moment. Then he turned to face Marcus Doyle, and the whole room felt the shift, like a change in air pressure before a storm. 10 minutes ago, Elias said, his voice calm but carrying easily across the silent restaurant, "You had 2 of your security staff remove a woman from this table. Told her, in front of everyone here, that this was not a shelter, and that if she was here to beg, the door was behind her." Marcus's face had gone pale, but he tried to recover, forcing a laugh that came out thin. "Mr. Sims, I don't know what you heard, but there was a misunderstanding. We had a woman who wasn't a paying guest taking up a table during our busiest hour. I was simply managing my restaurant. Her name is Loretta Sims," Elias said. The room shifted again. A few people exchanged glances, connecting the last names, not yet believing what they were beginning to suspect. "She is my mother," Elias continued. "She was sitting right there, waiting for me, because I asked her to meet me here today. I was 15 minutes late because I was finishing the paperwork on this building's new 10-year commercial lease. The lease that determines whether this restaurant exists past the next 90 days. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed. Renata Cole stepped forward and set a slim folder on the bar top, opening it to reveal a printed still frame from Danny's recording. Marcus, mid-sentence, his finger pointed at an empty chair where Loretta had been sitting. "We also have the exit interview from a former hostess named Carla," Renata said evenly, documenting a similar incident 8 months ago involving a family in religious dress. "We have a complaint that was filed and never escalated. And as of 11 minutes ago, we have video, timestamped from inside this restaurant, of you telling a 54-year-old woman to leave because you assumed, based on nothing but her coat, that she couldn't afford to be here. I didn't know who she was, Marcus said quickly, his voice rising in pitch. If I had known she was your mother, I never would have. That's exactly the problem, Elias said quietly, and something in his calm was far more devastating than shouting could ever have been. You shouldn't have needed to know who she was. She was a person sitting quietly, waiting for her son. That should have been enough. Marcus's excuses came fast now, tumbling over each other, the practiced confidence of the last 7 years dissolving in real time in front of the very crowd he'd performed for just 20 minutes earlier. It was a bad day, he tried. We were slammed. I misspoke. I can apologize to her directly. I can comp the meal. I can. You had her physically escorted out the front door, Elias said, in front of 40 guests. There is no meal to comp. I was protecting my business, Marcus said, and for the first time, real fear entered his voice. I built this restaurant from nothing. 7 years, Mr. Sims. Please. You didn't build this restaurant from nothing, Renata Cole said, tapping the folder on the bar. Your father's initial investment covered 80% of your build-out costs. This restaurant has operated in a building you don't own, on a lease you don't control, and as of this moment, that lease is not being renewed. The words landed like a verdict. Somewhere near the kitchen pass, a glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the marble floor, and nobody moved to clean it up. Marcus looked around the room, at Priya, who wouldn't meet his eyes, at Danny, standing quietly with his arms crossed, at the businessmen who'd laughed with him 20 minutes ago and were now looking anywhere but at him. He looked, finally, at the empty chair by the window, and something in his face collapsed entirely. Please, he said again, quieter now. This is everything I have. So is her dignity, Elias said. And you took it from her in under a minute, in front of everyone in this room, because you decided a tired woman in an old coat wasn't worth 10 seconds of patience. The room stayed silent for a long moment after that, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Marcus's knees seemed to lose some of their certainty. He reached out and gripped the edge of the bar, steadying himself. His face had gone the color of the tablecloths. A few of his regulars, the ones who'd laughed loudest at his jokes over the years, quietly gathered their coats and left without finishing their meals, unwilling to be seen anywhere near this collapse. Renata Cole did not raise her voice. She simply closed the folder, looked at Marcus with the flat, professional disappointment of someone who had seen this exact story too many times, and said, Building security will need you to gather your personal items by end of day. The ownership group will be in touch with your legal counsel regarding the terms of your departure. You can't do this, Marcus said, though even he seemed to hear how hollow it sounded now. We already have, Renata said. 2 of the building's own security staff, not Marcus's men this time, stepped forward and waited by the kitchen doors, patient and unhurried, giving him the dignity he had refused to give a woman 20 minutes earlier. It was, several people in that room would later say, the loudest silence they had ever witnessed. Danny quietly walked to the front doors, pushed them open, and stepped outside onto the sidewalk where Loretta Sims still stood, waiting, not for a table this time, but simply because she hadn't known where else to go. Ma'am, he said gently, I think you should come back inside. 3 months later, the space that had once been Doyle's Chop House reopened under a new name. Sims and Coal Table, a modest, warm restaurant with the same marble floors, but none of the same coldness, co-funded by the investment group, and, in a detail that made the local paper's business section, partly owned in trust by Loretta Sims herself. She didn't work the floor as an owner in any grand sense. She still preferred the quiet satisfaction of small things, greeting regulars by name, remembering a customer's order after one visit, the same warmth she'd once given to elderly patients who had no one else to check on them. But her name was on the lease now, in ink beside her son's. Danny had been offered the general manager position within the first month. He'd hesitated at first, unsure he was ready, until Loretta told him over coffee one morning that the whole point of second chances was that nobody ever feels fully ready for them. Carla, the hostess who'd been fired for defending a family and jobs, received a formal settlement from the old ownership group and a standing invitation to return, which she accepted, this time with the title front-of-house director, and a policy binder she helped write herself, one that made clear, in writing, that no guest would ever again be seated, moved, or removed based on how they looked. Priya stayed on too, promoted to assistant manager, and kept a framed photograph behind the host stand, not of a menu or a wine list, but of Loretta and Elias standing together on opening night, her hand resting on his arm, both of them smiling in a way that had nothing to do with money at all. As for Marcus Doyle, his name quietly disappeared from the city's restaurant scene. No dramatic headline, no public scandal beyond what those 40 lunch guests had already witnessed with their own eyes. Just a slow, permanent erosion of the reputation he'd spent 7 years polishing. The kind of consequence that doesn't make the news, but never really goes away either. On opening night at Sims and Cole Table, Elias stood at the same window where Table 12 used to sit, now home to a small brass plaque that read simply, "For every guest who ever waited quietly to be seen." In his pocket, he carried his father's old watch, the one his mother had finally passed down to him, its leather band replaced, its hands finally keeping perfect time. Have you ever seen someone treated like they didn't belong somewhere, simply because of how they looked? What did you do in that moment? And what do you wish you had done? Drop your answer in the comments below. Like, share, and subscribe for more real stories about dignity, justice, and the quiet power of people who are underestimated.